Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at Pitafi World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories in Pakistan. The first is with reference to, of course, the way we move forward in terms of economic stability and, of course, progress on that front is very, very important. And there are a lot of factors that contribute to that. There is, of course, the IMF bailout package that Pakistan is, of course, moving forward with, but there is then also the impact that that creates on bilateral engagements, our relationships with different countries in terms of trade, and then, of course, how we manage all of that at home in light of the current political situation. And while, of course, we talk about many economic indicators and many aspects with reference to the economy of Pakistan that are very, very integral as we move forward, and we've seen the government and the finance ministry work towards that, it is also essential to have the foundation of political stability. And so in light of what has happened in the last month and, of course, over the last couple of years with reference to PTI and the kind of rallies that we witnessed, the kind of ruckus that we witnessed on May 9th last year, it is important, of course, to understand whether or not we will be moving forward towards that political stability, which the Prime Minister of Pakistan emphasized on in his first day of office, and with, of course, the aspect of a charter of economy, which is very, very important. This, of course, has been reiterated by the Prime Minister and the government numerous times. What we saw in the Parliament also is discussions on the way forward in terms of dialogue and negotiations. We also have, following, of course, the discussion in the Parliament, the National Assembly Speaker speaking about how his residence and his office is open 24 hours for any discussions. And this is, of course, something that he guarantees will be done without any deficit to any side, and that there will be a neutral venue in terms of any political negotiations. Whether or not that will be the case, especially in terms of what the opposition wants and how they have proceeded with this in the past, of course, remains to be seen. There has been a committee that has been formed, but there hasn't been any progress in terms of dialogue. So that, of course, something that still eludes us. And so it's very, very integral to economic stability, which we're going to be discussing further in our first segment. Our next one is going to be taking a look at an equally important issue with reference to what has been going on in Pakistan in terms of course, internet connectivity, which has been something very, very important in terms of all businesses and all daily chores in life. And this is something that the citizens of Pakistan and the industry also have experienced and suffered from. So when we talk about this particular issue, this was another discussion that came up in the Parliament with, of course, many leaders, including those from the PPP, talking about how there needs to be internet connectivity and that the government needs to be answerable in terms of what lies ahead, with the IT minister also talking about the move forward and emphasizing on how this is something that is done based on very important concerns and something that of course, that the government does not deny, but is, of course, something that they've been working on for quite some time now. So we're going to explore what really is going on in this particular case and how important it is to move forward with progress on that front. That will be the focus in the second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by Senior Analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, and we've also been joined by Mr. Farhan Bokhari, who's a Senior Analyst. Thank you very much, Mr. Farhan, for joining us and taking the time out to be part of the debate. And I'll start with you in terms of what we've seen happen in terms of the political situation, of course, in the recent past and also before that, and particularly with reference to the opposition and the PTI in particular. And that, of course, is something that the government has been reiterating for quite some time now, that it is open to dialogue. But at the same time, the kind of actions that we've seen PTI taken, the kind of steps that the party has taken, or the kind of narrative that it has put forward, it has become increasingly difficult to engage in a truly political manner. However, the Parliament, of course, in recent discussions have pointed yet again to this door being open. Do you think that that can possibly happen in terms of the kind of history we've seen with regards to the PTI and the kind of narrative that they put forward? Will they really be indulging in such talks, or is it rhetoric once again?
It's hard to tell at this stage precisely because the PTI's positions have gone through changes and counter changes, and so there's a lack of consistency. I think the messaging makes it very clear that there isn't a consistent line on how to go forward. Within the party as well, we've seen kind of different factions, some in favor of continued aggression, others want to be more conciliatory. And if you talk to PTI leaders, their standard line of argument is, of course, that with the leader locked in jail, there's very little that they can do to kind of forge a consensus. But I think that argument is very hard to accept on its face value. One of the better sort of recent developments has been the initiative taken by the Speaker of the Parliament, Speaker of the National Assembly rather, to try to bring the government and opposition MPs, MNAs, on the table. And if this initiative within the purview of the parliament progresses, then I think it's possible that eventually, at the end of the day, we do see the government and the opposition moving, at least sitting down and trying to discuss some of their issues. I doubt if we'll see an end to the acrimony that we've seen, recurring acrimony on the streets of Pakistan. I think that will, unfortunately, that is likely to continue for a while till there's some kind of a sense of the way forward. Ultimately, everyone has to recognize that if they want to be part of the political system, then there are certain fundamentals, certain basics that they have to protect, preserve, and promote. This whole idea of wrecking up the entire sort of atmosphere in a way, in a reckless way, I think is something that needs to be reconsidered, because opposition today could be the government tomorrow. And I think it's in everyone's collective interest to agree on some kind of a safeguard surrounding economic policies and the way forward. Because short of that, short of some agreement, I think it will be very hard to convince investors, especially domestic investors, and of course, foreign investors will take the cue from what domestic investors are doing. It will be very hard to convince investors to step ahead and take stakes in Pakistan for the long term. That is really the fundamental objective that everyone, I think, should follow.
Right. And Faisal, that's important, particularly in terms of what we expect from the political leaders. But in terms of what we've seen happen in the past, and in terms of the kind of scenario that, of course, exists in terms of course, the founding leader in jail, in terms of the cases involved, and then, of course, in terms of the way that we've seen accountability unfold also in the military quarters, and then the connections with May 9th. And I want your take on that in particular, in terms of how will that factor in when we talk about the government's response, when we talk about the PTI's response, and engagement and meaningful dialogue?
Yeah, Sana, that's of course, very good question, because all of us, we are anxiously waiting for the day when all of the political parties, they can achieve some kind of consensus. And this consensus, I mean, me and Farrukh and you, we've been of course highlighting it since almost couple of years, and we have been demanding from the political parties to show maturity and sit on the table and achieve a consensus, if not the political consensus, at least on the basis of economic consensus. There should always be a consensus that can shape Pakistan, that no matter what, they will never do, they will never go to that extent that can of course hurt the Pakistan's economic lines as well. Yesterday I gave the example of Scarface. Today I would give the example of good, bad and ugly. And in this context, of course, we expect from the political parties, I mean, traditionally Pakistan's political parties, as soon as they get into the treasury benches, they are good. But as soon as they leave them in opposition benches, they are bad. But this time around, of course, we are facing another term that is ugly, because since almost 2 years, the opposition is getting more and more uglier. And to me, I think that extreme stance should never be taken by any of the political parties. And when it comes to talks with the government, with the treasury benches, that door should never be closed. and especially in a political fabric like Pakistan, where are the political parties such as People's Party is one of them party that has very good relations, be it the religious party or be it the far left, far right, all of the political parties. I mean, Pakistan People's Party, it had always bridged itself for bringing all of the political parties together. This time around, I am expecting once more they have the faces that can be presented towards the both sides, and they can play a pivotal role. And when we are hearing, of course, from National Assembly Speaker as well, that for our economic stability, we have to have the political stability for sustainability of the achievements we have so far gained in our economic sector. Especially we know that since 2 years, more than 2 years, government have been trying to revive sort of the damages which were made to the economy. And in that context, I mean, we are faced with IMF, we are faced with, I mean, people at large, they are faced with the tough decisions which are being made by the government itself of imposition of taxes, more taxes, and then the recommendations which were being coming from IMF, and that them recommendations, they were to be imposed, and in accordance to that, of course, now, I mean, everyone is concerned about the political fabric, and knowing that the opposition party is echoing around that if this doesn't happen, that doesn't happen in 5 days or 6 days, then next weekend we will be going for what's they called, Farrukh, they call it.
They don't call it Farrukh.
No, they don't call it Farrukh, but of course they are sort of going for civil disobedience, and that civil disobedience, I mean, civil disobedience means that you are entirely going against the whole country, the whole masses of the countries, because in a country like Pakistan, where there are a huge number of poor people as well, who, if they don't earn, then they can't survive daily. So in that country, and this kind of civil disobedience, if one of the political party is coming up with and couple of more are joining their ranks, then of course it would be affecting not only people at large, but of course Pakistan's economy as well, and especially when Pakistan is seeking FDIs, Pakistan is seeking investments in agriculture sector, mining sector, SIFC playing its role, and then when we talk about IMF lending us money, that would require increasing the volume of our economy as well. How would we do that? That is only possible through inviting more people to invest in Pakistan, so that industries that had been shut down in recent past, they can be revived once more, and industries, once they flourish, then is the time when there would be more jobs created for more people, and people's life would be at ease. So when it comes to political stability, it's entirely interlinked with the economic stability, and I think whatever the capacity of the political parties is, they must come forward and sit down and get to a conclusion where they can achieve a consensus on what can be done being a treasury benches, and what cannot be done, what can be done being the opposition party, and what can't be done. So there are set parameters that need to be derived from the political parties, and they need to be followed.
And with reference to when we talk about this situation, Farrukh, I want your understanding in terms of course, the kind of political consensus or stability that we've been looking for or been talking about is something that hasn't happened so far. But in terms of the linkage that we create with economic stability, I want to understand how we can actually take a look at the complete analysis of the situation. We have a report coming in with how we have the current account surplus, which has reached a 10-year record high. And then, of course, we talk about how the economic stability is linked with political stability, which we don't have at the moment in its true sense and spirit. So I want your take in how we understand the entire situation comprehensively in terms of which indicators indicators are we looking at? How are we linking that directly with political stability, and whether or not somehow the system has adjusted to this political instability or situation that Pakistan is in, and in parallel we have the economy which is going on its own track. Is that possible?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question. I think let me start by welcoming Farhan Bokhari Sahab. It has been a long while since we met. Good to see you, sir, after a long time. Now, the question, of course, you need a meta-analysis, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take you back to the days when all these crises started. Although there's an argument that since Pakistan's birth, the country has been going through the same crisis repeatedly over and over again. But the recent one, one would argue, started either in 2022 or it started in 2014 when PTI first actually started its combative politics. And then you can actually take it even further back, to when PTI was created or when General Musharraf was actually shown the door. Since then, you realize that all our neighbors, and I'm fearful perhaps that one day even Afghanistan might be showing better progress because of its mineral deposits. All our major neighbors have been actually going places, and we have been stuck in the rut. And why would that be? Because we keep on dragging each other down. Because of the perpetual state of crisis or this deadlock that we have been actually squandering opportunities. It is called opportunity cost. So this deadlock has to actually stop. Remember that in Pakistan's economy's history, Pakistan's politics history, a decade of 90s was perhaps one of the worst, because the country was like deadlocked. Every time one government would come, the other would go. And that was the time when our two major neighbors, China and India, actually started taking off. And look at the kind of difference now there is between their economies and Pakistan's. So is it not important to actually settle all these matters amicably and peacefully? Now, the second thing is there's another very important, indication from history that can be taken as a lesson, and that is Charter of Democracy. When, both People's Party and PMLN, who had been busy in 1990s bringing each other down, when they realized that in the end, other forces actually benefit, they started coming together, and they came up with rules of game, although they have been actually dilly-dallying on that as well, but still the broader structure of Charter of Democracy holds. So now, given that the country has a constitution, there is supposed to be a social contract. Question is, are we going to stick to all these guiding rules or not? PTI is one of the parties which was not part of Charter of Democracy. Now, if dialogue starts and if they can come up with the rules of game, then we have very little space for any kind of chaos in the country. Of course, there are going to be elemental, crises. There are elements which are going to use name of religion to undercut the rule of law or for that matter constitution. But that is a different story. The state has found a way to fight them as well. But these are people who are actually following a constitution, or at least they claim that they believe in constitution, and they get people's vote. Sina, I have never asked anybody for a single vote. So I cannot actually sit here and judge any of them, because these are important people, because people believe in them. Of course, there is an elite capture, and this is the tragedy of Pakistan's story, that even the people who are actually fighting the government or the elite are also elite. So in the end, it is a story of Pied Pipers actually fighting, and we all dancing like mice behind them. Unfortunately, that has created so much problem for our lives that yesterday or day before yesterday, my children could not actually go to school. And that has been happening repeatedly. Why should that happen? Any citizen of the country, any taxpayer, any person who votes, any person who does not break law, why should they be subjected to all these crises? Because these, for the want of any better term, numbnuts cannot actually get together. And finally, one thing that is very important to remember, that PTI has to find a voice and attitude for dialogue, because at this moment I understand PTI is in a deep hole, but it dug it itself. When it was pushed out of power, had it not quit the parliament, it could come back to power within months. Similarly, when it was out of power, it's resigned from assemblies. It has been self-sabotaging daily, and it hasn't stopped. The first principle is stop. Now, if the end game is, the end state that it wants to go for is PTI's leadership being freed, maybe that eventually happens. But if they are going to be, following some other Pied Piper, like they want General Faz to actually come out and all charges be dropped, that won't happen.
Right. And Farhan Sahab, I want your take on this as well. But add to that also, when we talk about how there has been a conversation in the parliament recently with talks of a neutral venue, and then there was, of course, the National Assembly Speaker saying that his offices are open. And while these offers have been made by different elements, I want your perspective on whether or not you think that there are certain elements that exist that can actually truly play that role, be it elements within the parliament or outside of the parliament.
That's a very pertinent question, but at the same time, also a complex one. We live in this day and age, unfortunately, where our environment is very polarized, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't like that, but it is. So the question is, how do you make the transition more like a normal democracy of the kind that you see in other parts of the world, where or parties or the ruling coalition, whatever you have, accepts a role for that side, and together they try to stabilize, to bring in a certain degree of stability to the political system, the parliamentary system, and respect for mandate is one that really helps to create a degree of certainty and stability, which is important even for investors. That's very important, because people don't want to come to a country or invest in a country, even domestic investors, where it's not clear to them how long the government will last. And if there are early elections, then a new government, what would it be like, and what would its take be on policy issues? So this is not just a matter of individuals representing two different political factions sitting across the table from each other. I think there are bigger stakes for the future of Pakistan. And therefore, some degree of calm needs to be put in place as an essential first step to work towards the kind of stability that Pakistan badly needs. That, to me, is the fundamental question. Ending the acrimony and moving on to a more settled phase in our politics.
This is important, particularly when we talk about this case. But I also want your take in terms of when we take a look at how that understanding also exists in the public. So while these domains exist and these interactions exist, of course, within the parliament or outside, there is also the perception that people have of what is going on whether or not there is political stability, whether or not there is accountability, whether or not these elements are engaging with each other in a meaningful manner. And so this talk and its impact is very important. So what is your perspective in terms of how the people at large, even businesses, if we talk about economic stability, relate to these conversations or these possibilities and understand them to be true?
Well, there are two ways to look at it. On the one hand is the matter of our population profile. Almost 40% or below 40% of the population lives below the poverty line. And for them, for that segment, country of 240 plus million, and here you're talking about 95 million plus people from that population profile. living in abject poverty, their interest lies more attuned to bread and butter issues. And I think that is where the focus ought to go. If, if there's a bold economic recovery in different sectors of the economy, of course, people down the line, and especially the impoverished ones, will benefit enormously. So there's that part of the population. The other part of the population are, for want of a better word, the more sort of middle class segment of Pakistan who want some consistency in policies so that the right kind of growth takes place. And it's not really a question of whether ours is a two-party or three-party political landscape, or multi-party, or one party, or whatever. Ultimately, consistency and sort of the way forward, and having that confidence that the policies announced in 1 year will remain in place for X number of years, the tenure of the government 5 years, for people to be able to make decisions and to really come forward with their investments. That is really the fundamental issue for ordinary people across the country.
When we take a look at how the different institutions are actually going to approach this subject, and then of course how when we take a look at the way that people are understanding stability in Pakistan, is how they're also making decisions, even financial ones, even investment ones. And so in terms of what we see on the media, in terms of what we understand from the kind of reports that are coming in, what do you think is the current mix where the average person stands in terms of its financial situation and its relation to the state of affairs that the government or the opposition is currently in?
Yeah, frankly, obviously, the financial situation of a common man in Pakistan, it is in the dire conditions, and largely it has a lot to do with the 20 years of war and terror Pakistan have been fighting against, and that on the top, of course, we are seeing that constantly we are facing political instability because opposition is not happy with the current circumstances they are going through, and at the same time we had COVID in the middle as well, and then international international wars which are being going on in Eastern Europe, and then Middle East crisis as well. Both of them, they are affecting Pakistan's economy as well. And if overall we look at the condition, I mean, Pakistan faced a dilemma in which the investments couldn't be attracted towards Pakistan because of, largely because of Pakistan's security crisis which Pakistan was facing in terms of fighting against the terrorism for a long time, and still we are. Though America left the region, but still Pakistan is fighting the same war. And in that context, of course, there are so many factors that affect Pakistan in this domain. And when we talk about our youth, Pakistan is one of the countries that has a youth bulge, a significant youth bulge in terms of 67% of the population is considered as youthful, and majority of them who end up doing their degrees, completing the graduations, after that they don't have many opportunities within the country, and that too has a lot to do with the investments in different industries. If we don't see the industries getting the investments, how would the jobs be created for them graduates? So they end up leaving the countries as well, and the taxpayer money that ends up being used for creating all of these graduates, once they are graduated, they simply leave the country, and the product, that very product is obviously facilitating Europe or elsewhere in the Middle East and all of the other countries where there are certain opportunities being filled by Pakistani Pakistani fresh grads. And when overall it comes to Pakistan's common man, of course Pakistan's common man, as it has been said by Bokhari Sahab as well, rightly pointed out, that it is the bread and butter everyone is seeking and fighting for the bread and butter, and the same situation continues. And in this whole vicious circle, one thing that is very important, that is of obviously political fabric of Pakistan. And right now, of course, if we talk about the political parties, especially the opposition parties, they have their own agenda to settle, they have their own agenda to, of course, look after, rather than the problems faced by masses at large in terms of economic problems. They would, of course, come towards their own political scorings and agendas, and this is the most important aspect which is being neglected. And to me, I think masses at large, they will be seeing these kind of steps by the by the political parties as well. As in Punjabi they say, pehle pet puja phir koi kam duja. So in this context, of course, I expect from masses at large to, of course, fill their bellies first and then think about another political scorings or anything else. So this is
Right,
what this state of
absolutely, but that
affairs
is
is.
also essential in terms of what the people provide. Farhan Sahab, I also want your take on how important accountability is in this mix, and the role of the judiciary when we talk about political stability.
Well, look, accountability should be a normal and a consistent aspect of any ruling structure, so that it's not something that you bring in or kick in for the short sort of term. Pakistan has had different eras of accountability going through different governments, going back to the 1990s and thereafter. I think we need to perhaps refine some of our systems. The judiciary is, of course, very important in all of this. The judiciary is also, large parts of it are under a great deal of pressure from especially at the grassroots, that lower judiciary, the sheer number of cases, the backlog. It's a long sort of haul. And then the nature of the crimes has also changed somewhat. Uh, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, we did not really focus on electronic crimes. Now, I realize that some of my friends would say that, the use of the social media should be without any bar or any restrictions. Um, the reality is that even in the Western world, where social media, the whole sort of structure of or trend of social media began in the first place, there are, hate to use the word restrictions, but there are limits to how far you can go before you cross the line. The law defines a certain line. You cannot target people. You cannot defame people. You cannot cause harm to people, and you can certainly not go after the national security interests of any one country in question. And then there are cases, extreme cases of conflict, of wars, where there are restrictions that come into play automatically. Years ago, I remember, I think this was in the 70s, I read this book in the 80s. Interesting title, which is The First Casualty, written by Australian journalist Philip Knightley. And the opening line was very, very interesting. I still remember that. Said, in war, truth is the first casualty. Of course, suggesting that there are extreme situations where you have to set aside the flow of information, or the freedom of information, and come up with the restrictions, because there are certain other interests which have to be watched. I think going forward, what we need as a country is a very comprehensive dialogue uh, involving parliamentarians, institutions, especially institutions responsible for carrying forward the process of accountability, and also society at large, intellectuals, even the media, I think, have to become part of this dialogue to move our present day sort of context towards a broader consensus, as near an agreement as possible between different factions, to decide exactly what is the point of view.
Absolutely, and these are important factors with reference to how we move forward. Thank you very much, Farhan Bokhari sir, for joining us and being
Thank you
part
very
of the
much.
discussion. And Farrukh, when we look at all of these elements together, particularly when we talk about the parliament, the judiciary, or the military establishment, and then of course media also as an important pillar, how then will synergies across these also happen? Because we can talk about the opposition or the government, but that's only one element in the picture.
All right. Thank you very much again. Very quickly, when you are talking about, pillars, then you have to either, rely on the textbook or then look at it through real prism. So in real politics, perhaps there's only one pole, that is army, that is holding everything together. But in book, according to book, army is not supposed to be a pillar of the state, right?
Sure.
Army is part of executive, and executive has its own pillar. Then there's judiciary, and then of course there is the parliament or legislature. With that, of course, all elements have to come together. Unfortunately, that does not happen. I have to slightly disagree with a term called, of course, the producer seems to want me to actually conclude very
No,
quickly.
no, go ahead.
No, I can conclude. Okay, I concluded. Producers up. Over to the next topic.
Right. So I don't know if that was the cue for you, but we're going to be moving on to the next segment that focuses again on a similar topic that we've just been touching upon, particularly in terms of freedom of speech and internet connectivity. And while that is, of course, an important element also in the discussion of political stability, because these questions need to be discussed, and this is something that was raised in the parliament, of course, holding people and government and officers accountable, and also in terms of ensuring that particular area of space exists for the people and businesses, and of course essentially also for economic viability. And so when we talk about what has been happening with regards to internet connectivity, is this something out of the ordinary? We've been hearing, of course, the talk of firewall or a web management system, but the questions raised in terms of why such a delay, and the fact that we are experiencing these difficulties, how is that going to be something that the different elements in the society, particularly people and businesses, will be able to tackle with? Farrukh.
All right. I think that all the concerns that have actually raised this response are genuine. I think that, as was pointed out in the during the previous segment, these are very serious existential challenges. But the problem is that we haven't actually found the appropriate model. We keep on going for models like China, for that matter, or others. China actually had a clean break from Western, social media websites. They have this firewall, but that is it. They have their own social system, right? Social media system. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of ecosystem. So what happens? We have to try to actually let it in as well, and then all this hope of actually controlling everything on internet access points becomes a problem, because you can sniff data, but data sniffing can be limited only to certain things. So what happens is, when you allow both these worlds to clash, the internet suffers, and that continues to suffer even as we speak. Internet speeds are bad. By the way, we were supposed to go from 4G to 5G, and we seem to be actually relegating ourselves to 3G, 2G. When you talk about the minister, IT minister, you and I both are very fond of her, Sana. But I think that it is unfair that she has to defend something which doesn't seem to actually work. And because of this clash, in the end, our internet and IT industry is going to really suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of defense, she did also speak about the fact that a lot of it is also to do with the Interior Ministry. And Faisal, I want your take on that in terms of where does the accountability or responsibility lie then? Is it the IT Ministry? Is it the Interior Ministry? Is it the Prime Minister's office? Where do we question or understand the approach that we can take for the betterment in this particular area? And I believe this was also raised by PPP leaders in the parliament.
I think nobody is to be blamed in this context. It's just the time which we are passing through that is to be blamed.
Not blame, but who's responsible when we talk about fixing this?
Fixing, yeah. When we talk about, of course, fixing, then of course I would straight away say that the security mechanism of Pakistan, of course, it ensures that wherever it is required to be stopped due to the security situations of that area or that particular sort of region, then they do impose it. And to me, I think this is a practice which has been carried out in the past as well and still is going on. And with the addition of firewall, why firewall? Because rather than suspending the whole internet, there were certain certain apps that were being used for the fake news purposes and for the designs, nefarious designs of enemies of Pakistan, that needed to be, of course, skimmed out, and that's why we have been seeing firewall in that context. But when it comes to, of course, efficiency of the internet, yes, it gets hurt, as Farrukh has rightly pointed out, that rather than going to 5Gs, we are going somewhere down there. So I think that is happening, and it has everything to do with the security, Sana. Overall, of course, even if somebody is just fighting with the country, the enemy, if fighting is with the country, with the sort of sort of their mechanism of the hybrid war they are utilizing against Pakistan, in which, of course, we are seeing that social mediums are being used to propagate against Pakistan and propagate against the institutions of Pakistan. In that context, of course, they end up of course, suspending all of the services. So to me, I think it has everything to do with this.
Sana, by the way, very quickly,
yes, you can
sentences.
add to that, but also add to that the issue of freedom of speech that was also raised. So how does that factor
Yeah,
in when we talk
that
about
is
these
important,
steps?
Sana. I think you can call me a free speech absolutist, and I think that words cannot harm. But unfortunately, because we live, everything is, to quote Vice President Kamala Harris, we live within our context.
Yeah.
So the context is the Pakistan social context, and we are not falling from trees, right? But regarding what I was going to say, there is an element of foreign policy involved here as well. Remember that Elon Musk, the man who owns X, now is a co-pilot of the world. And at that time, you keep his company blocked in the country, right? How does it actually go out? It becomes a problem. So in the end, you'll have to realize that all these things are going to have ramifications, and you have to find a way to work with them as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us in the debate. As always, that's all that we have time for, and we'll now see you tomorrow.